Okay, so here we are finishing up the Greeks, and I think that when you have those images in your mind of the classical Greek, what that statue, those statues represent in terms of the idea of perfection, the ideal versus the Hellenistic, the emotional, the Parthenon, the order of that, all those visual images and the development of those the sculptures and how that occurred, that should help sort of get you ready. You have a visual image of what we're going to talk about now, which is the philosophy. Gets a little not complicated, it's long. Theater and literature and all these things, these arts are part of the humanities, and they have influenced who we are today as Westerners. So this is this right up here. This is this is not Greek. Obviously, it says 2019. This is just from a play, Oedipus, one of my favorite plays, which is a Greek tragedy. And we'll talk about that later as we move through these slides. Now, these are, how I like to compare. So this is breaking down the classical philosophers and with the Hellenistic. So later through the PowerPoint, we're going to look specifically at these beliefs, these theories. And so you can see with the classical, when you have the spirit bearer, that's when you have Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. Some pretty well-known names. So, but there's some other fellows that were important and some really important ideas taking place. And so I've listed these here. And so I think you have to think about all these gods in the ancient civilizations, as well as with the Greeks, very many gods. And the guy named Thales, he says, listen, let's just look at the origins of nature and how, how maybe there's some natural explanation for things we believe in instead of putting all our faith in all these gods, like Zeus sitting up on a hill, up in the sky somewhere. So that becomes important. Let me just say this. Seeds are planted that become trees later. So these are very important seeds that continue to grow over time and become really who we are in the West. Parmenides, he is the father of formal logic for you computer science or mathematicians or biology, nursing, the logic, formal logic. Whereas the sophists are pretty much teachers, and the sophists sort of wander around, not really connected to material wealth, and they're teachers and they're philosophers and they ask questions, and so this is going to really trigger this a shift in the culture, because when you do ask questions, there's oftentimes can be a shift when you just don't accept status quo. So we start with Socrates, and here is a sculpture of Socrates. Socrates didn't end up very well, because he had to drink hemlock because he was condemned to death by the Athenians. But look at some of these principles. And how does that apply to us today? Because you see how we became who we are as a culture, Western culture. These are the roots. These are the seeds. And so we're the tree with many branches. And things begin here. Very important things. Ideas or theories or belief systems that we connect to today. That can be actually also create bias, because students, we are constructs, and we are a construct, a belief system, a socioeconomic belief system of roles, and we're a construct. And so the ideas of right and wrong and what we believe in came from somewhere. So you're going to see your beliefs in this. And I love Socrates because he says, listen, this is probably the most important point in this yellow ochre color. Knowledge begins with what we don't know. You see? I love that. I mean, that says it all. Because Socrates didn't answer questions. He would always ask the question, you would answer, and he would ask another question. Nothing was written down. He did not record his teaching. Plato wrote a lot of that down. Plato was one of his students. And so we're here, remember the Greeks are about humanism, not mystical. What it means to be human. And then you have these core values of, here it is, moral values come from reason. Reason. Socrates is talking about those principles and the idea of rational inquiry. And that's where you get science. And also, very important, self-examination. Now that self-examination principle was actually what I started with when I said, listen, a creative person, problem solver, has these characteristics. They are non-judgmental, open-minded, and flexible. And someone like that is self-reflective and self-examining. So Socrates, he doesn't end up very well because he's causing problems with the youth, the male youth in Athens, and everybody likes him, but he's disruptive. So he actually has to go to trial. And, the tribunal likes him, so they say, well, we've got to put you to death because you're so disruptive and civil disobedience, and you're causing problems, and you can choose your own death. And he chooses to drink hemlock, a poison. So there's many paintings of him in the later periods in the Renaissance, whatever. And so that's what he chooses. And he has his students, hanging around him, and then he chooses that demise. So Plato, now those knowledge begins with what you don't know, I think is very important. And Plato was his student. So Plato is very interesting, and he is going to really, I want to share this with you, talk about, now this is before Christianity, okay? This is several hundred years before Christianity. And so when you look at Parmenides and you look at these enthales, they're thinking, well, what is their natural order? And so Plato actually thinks about reality, like what is real. And this relates to his idea about the three levels of the soul. I love his story, The Allegory of the Cave. I'm not going to go into that. I might mention it briefly, but I would like for you to read that. So if he talks about reality versus the soul, he says, he says there's three levels. Level one is where truth resides. It's the realm of truth. It's a higher reality, justice, unchanging ideas, where the true being exists. Well, we are on level 3. We have a memory of level 2 and are always trying to get to level 2. We can't get to level 3 because that is true being. You could say it's sort of an early idea about God, something beyond knowledge. Level 2 is unchanging ideas of truth and beauty that we're trying to get to. But we're human, so we're level 1. And although we have this memory, you could say an archaic memory, that we're going for reason, we're going for truth, but appetite topples reason because we live in a world of change. Appetite does not mean food, appetite means desire. He says, we have the potential to aspire to level 2, but our desires topple reason. The allegory of the cave is an excellent example of that, where people are in the bottom of a cave and all they see on the walls are shadows and they're chained. And they believe that's reality till one escapes. And he goes, it's very symbolic. He travels, he climbs up because he sees a light. See, their back or two, there's a light up top at the mouth of the cave. And he travels, he climbs up to that light, and he finds that everything he and his friends believed in, shadows, were real, are an illusion. That is just their shadow from the light above. That is my office light, and I'm going to have to wave my arms. There you go. This might occur once or twice. I'm not stopping now. It is, I don't know, evening to about 8 o'clock. Okay, back to the spooky story. So the fellow says, well, what we believe is an illusion. Those shadows aren't real. So he goes back down to tell his friends. He said, look, what if I told you what you believe in are shadows? It's not real. And they said to him, we would kill them. If you challenge our beliefs, we will kill you. So that's the allegory of the cave. We'll follow up with that a little later because I'm going to have you read some literature or at least know some epics and certainly this story. So Plato is very interesting as well because he criticizes Athenian democracy. We have democracy. And he says, these are some of his points. He says, look, it's foolish to expect a regular person to think intelligently about foreign policy and economics. He says, you know, leaders are chosen and followed for not good reasons, like they're wealthy, they're good looking, their family background. He actually says democracy is dangerous because it can degenerate into anarchy. He also says a demigod can gain power by promising, for example, to plunder the rich to benefit the poor. So he's very skeptical of democracy because of the pitfalls. So what his answer is, let the philosophers, he says, only let the wisest attain that power to lead. Now, I like this too because he's classical and he's talking about a well-governed whole person. But he talks about the soul. That's very interesting. Reality has 3 levels. He talks about the soul having 3 parts. He said we have reason, and that is our soul is the pursuit of knowledge. He says we have the spirit, the spiritedness of courage and ambition. He said, but our soul, we have desire, and desire topples reason, desire, sex, possessions, material possessions, whatever, party, whatever. Our desires, our appetite, he calls them appetite, topples reason. I'll leave that there. So that's Plato. Aristotle. Now, Aristotle is very important because he takes the task of organizing all these thoughts of the pre-Socratic, Socrates, and Plato. But he's different than Plato. There's some very important points here that I want to point out to you because, as I said, you know, these ideas, these seeds are perpetuated throughout centuries, and they have to start somewhere. We already have a large slave population all over the planet during this period. The Egyptian population, big slave population, the ancient Near East, the Romans, huge slave populations to get the work done. Otherwise, you couldn't build pyramids. But Aristotle is different than Plato. He's very important. He's very important because he believes in the rationale and examination, which is, scientific. And he says theory must not conflict with facts. because it is a task of science to arrange facts into a system of knowledge. Now, actually, that is all of these theories are, they're monumental in the shift towards what the West will become. He said the best political community is formed by citizens of the middle class, since the wealthy just don't want to submit to authority. They just want to do what they want to do. But he also believes, like Socrates and Plato, that knowledge and ethics are possible, and they're based on reason. He says by training, we can develop our behavior and become a moral person. Now, these are all good things. He's very important, but he's also problematic for women and the slaves, because he says, and I have it in yellow ochre, he believes slavery was a natural state of nature. So slavery is natural. That is an idea, a construct that certainly continued for centuries. Because he also says that the state is more important than family. Because his belief in is this whole person that you must, give your time to, we would say, the community service, politics, running government, like being a participant. We would call that voting, okay? Now, so Aristotle, and you don't want to point out one bad thing. I don't think you want to point out one good thing. I think, there's two sides to a coin. So I always talk about this. I just said, he says to live the good life well, you need to participate, in the political community. But women were not allowed to do that, any political activities. He stated, women are inferior and failed males in nature. We should be silent and obey, and free men should rule over women. Yeah. So, yeah. So this is the mindset. This is the belief. This was pretty much, a way of life. And so those edicts, those ideas, certainly continue even today. And this is where it's coming from. Well, besides Eve being, bringing down all of mankind. By the time you combine Aristotle with Eve, yeah, okay. Enough said. You figure it out. Now, we're going to shift and talk about, that was all classical. Hellenistic, remember what I said, is global. You've got a lot of influences. And so what's happening here is these are a lot of different philosophies. And you're going to know some of these. You're going to call it something else. Now, Epicurean Magazine is a magazine, I don't know if it's still published, but it's all about fine food and wines. Well, that comes from the philosophy of Epicureanism. The philosopher's name is Epicurus. And this is a belief that, seek happiness and pleasure in life. That's what an Epicurean does. Now, it does not mean to be a hedonist and just lay out, drink, just, overdo anything. It doesn't mean that. It means find happiness and pleasure in life and in a balanced way. So don't confuse Epicureanism with hedonism. But let's just find, good food, some good wine, good beverage. Stoicism by a man named Zeno, which is a good name for a dog. This is the Stoic is the philosophy that the Romans adopted pretty much. And this idea, the Stoicism, you probably know Stoic, because it is about individual strength to persevere. And a stoic is very strong and doesn't show a lot of emotion when they're super happy or when they're really sad or disappointed. They just are stoic. So having the strength to stay sort of even. And you may know a stoic. Now, a skeptic and a cynic, you've heard of those words. Well, this is where it begins, and a skeptic or skepticism is that everything is an assumption and a hypothesis. I would say that I'm a skeptic because I don't like, really, I challenge or I just make an assumption that, is that true? Versus a cynic. Now, a cynic, I think a cynic is used in our culture pretty much, but that's a really negative person. But in the true sense of where it begins, a cynic is someone that just rebels against everything, gives away everything, is communal, is not materialistic, and just likes to be happy. Sort of like what we used to call a hobo, where you just, like in a cartoon, you know, that you're probably seeing a little stick with your little belongings on the end of the stick, and you ride the rails, you ride the trains, and you know what? You don't pay taxes, you're just free. That's what the origin of cynicism is. So now you have, and I told you in the Hellenistic period, it's multicultural, it's global. You've got all these different people from locations around the world that are in Rome, so it's very diverse. And you can see by these philosophies. And these are all new philosophies that are being developed because there are times in history when we have a lot of philosophy when there's change, and then there's times when it plateaus and everything stays the same. So this was one of those periods in history. That's the philosophy. The literature. There are two epic poems. These are spoken, and they're by Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I'm going to have you know what these two epics are about, as well as the Sumerian epic, so you can do comparison. And the Iliad, and I already said with the Mycenaeans, that's where they think Homer came up with these ideas. And so we're talking about the Trojan War, and in the Iliad, Achilles, and that's a really good movie too, has Brad Pitt in it. It's about the terror and glory of war, but it's also about Achilles. You know how we say the Achilles heel, that's our weakness, up above the heel of our foot? That comes from this story because he's very prideful. He's very talented, he's a great warrior, but he's very prideful, and that gets him and the warriors into trouble. So that's what happens there. Where the Odyssey is about Odysseus trying to get home after the Trojan War. It takes him 10 years because all these goddesses are tricking him, and his wife Penelope is waiting at home with all these suitors. And so I'm going to have you know something about that. I think you need to know something about some of the great Western epics, worldwide epics, because you have the Sumerian epic as well. Yeah. Not only do you have Greek literature, but you have drama, theater, which is now very popular. I'm talking about plays. It doesn't originate here because other people have theater, other cultures, but it develops into like an art form. And it begins, actually, it starts with theater, actually starts with festivals and people just having fun and acting out, and then it becomes like an art form. So you do have lyric poetry, and that just means that there's a lyre, that instrument right there, and you know their poetry is sung. on this instrument. And one of the most renowned lyric poets is Sappho from the island of Lesbos, an island that still exists today. And she is a very erotic poet, and her work, her poems reflect a bisexual lifestyle, which was acceptable in Greek life because, it's a very different, their sensibilities were different than ours. So, if a woman has a friend and she's not having any kind of intercourse with men, but she's having the attention of a woman, then she's still a virgin. So, still keeps that virginal status. So that's Sappho. This is Greek drama, and that is an amphitheater. That's half of a coliseum. And so your orator would be standing down here because there was no microphone. And he would be, talking up, and it would carry the sound into the theater here, going up those steps. So that's where you would have orators, and that's where you would have Greek drama. And it develops from the amphitheater. All men, women could not participate, and they're usually wearing masks. And it starts with one or two actors, and then it grows into more actors in this play. But you also have a chorus, which is a group of people, well, a group of men. They're on the side, and they're just sort of singing this refrain that's going to happen during this play. And so this is the playwright Sophocles. The play Oedipus is a wonderful play by Sophocles. And it's about, I say here, the well-intentioned people struggle courageously, but, fate is fate. No matter what you do, if that's your fate, you're going to lose. So in this, the reason that the eyes are bloodied in Oedipus is because he's a king, and there's this plague going around, and he speaks to the oracle, and the oracle doesn't want to tell him because the oracle knows that he's at fault, but he doesn't know it. And so as a young man, he was going along the road, and these people attacked him, and he killed them. Unbeknownst to him, he had killed the king, and that was his father, because his father and mother had given him up because the gods wanted him to. He didn't know that, though. So he travels on and becomes the king of the same place where his father was king, and unbeknownst to him, he marries his mother. He didn't know it was his mother. So all this comes out because the oracle saying, I don't want to tell you, it's terrible. And he said, no, you tell me, because this person is going to be banned. Well, the reason that the eyes are bloodied is because, first of all, he goes into his mother's room when she finds out what had happened, and she had hung herself. And he goes in, and then he knows the truth, that he had killed his father. No matter what he did, he didn't know that he did that. He didn't know that he married his mother. So he takes the brooch off her cloak, and he puts his eyes out. And that's why that's bloodied. That's Oedipus. The play Oedipus. So you Greeks have tragedy, and they have comedy. And so Aristophanes, he is a playwright, considered one of the greatest comedic playwriters. But he writes about social and political commentary. And Lysistrata is one of his, to me it's sort of a silly play, but it's about women during the Peloponnesian War that are sick and tired of the men going off to war, so that the women get together, they're alone in the village, and say, look, we're just not going to be affectionate if these guys don't stop warring. So that's the essence of that comedy. You can look these up on YouTube. Now, that's it. But that's a lot, especially when you look at the philosophy, the belief systems. This idea that there is a higher, now this is before Christianity, um, that there's a higher realm that we can't reach, that is this true being or this state of truth and justice. We can never reach it, though we try. Um, so, and the idea about rationale and that and morals and we can, you know, we can control, we have to control ourselves, um, and become more better ethical people. This is all based on the idea of humanism, that the Greeks are about what it means to be human, where right across the way the ancient Near East is still pretty mystical. And people are not, they're just following their kings. There's no autonomy. Where with the Greeks, there's this idea of self-worth and autonomy. So I've listed this as, actually it's probably in your book. There's three really great achievements philosophically: reason, freedom, and humanism. And reason means this, and this is what W.H. Auden says, the author: we would have never become fully conscious, which is to say we would not have become, for better or worse, fully human if it were not for the Greeks. And number one, you have reason. So Western thought begins with the Greeks by defining our capacity for reason, to rise above ritual and customs and superstition. And so this lifestyle is based on science and reason and philosophy and trying to become better as a culture, but as well as looking for truth. So reason is the first thing. And freedom is the second. And that means that when Mesopotamia, you know, they had no sense of individual worth that the Greeks were developing, and obviously we have. They had no understanding of political liberty because they weren't citizens. They were subjects in the ancient Near East. But with the Greeks, we are citizens, and that means we have political freedom. We can govern ourselves. We are capable of doing that. And also, we are free to choose honor or shame. And that's the idea of autonomy. Autonomy means that it is self-directed and you have control of that. So that's pretty important too. Lastly, you have this idea of humanism. The humanist attitude towards life is at the core, and that we express ourselves, our worth and significance, and the dignity of the individual in our humanism. So that's where we leave this module. The Greeks were in two parts, and then, you know, it began with the Aegean Sea early cultures, and that's where we end, and then we'll go to the Romans. So this may be the last slide. I'm going to click it, and if I'm cut off, see you next time.